So far, we've looked at many different types of belief and haven't really put them into one big picture yet. So when we talk about belief, we obviously immediately think about religious belief and not about atheism, which we define as a lack of belief. But as this slide suggests, do we all have faith in something? Yes, we do. So even if you're an atheist, you have a faith that your scientific and rational mind can get you to the truth, and that your belief that there's nothing beyond this world is a fact, is simply also another form of belief. So when we talk about beliefs, there are a range of them. Now, this lays them all out from the top to the bottom. And if you think about this for a second, you might notice a historical pattern. When you think about pantheism, you remember that pantheism was basically the form that most basic religions embraced. In other words, it was the earliest form of religious belief. So if you go back to the pre-Neolithic period, we were all pantheists. We believed that God was found in all things, and the spirit permeated all things, and that God and the universe were identical. It wasn't exactly polytheist because spirits were in all things. There wasn't even a limited amount of spirit. As we move into Hinduism, obviously we move into a more polytheistic. Polytheism, by definition, poly means many, theist means gods. So a polytheist believes that there are many gods. These usually are symbolic of natural forces. So this is the beginning of a coalescence of godly power into symbolic forms. So polytheism is naturally going to lead us into monotheism. Not naturally, it will lead us into monotheism in the West, because monotheism will be this idea that there's one high God, and the one high God then will define religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the Abrahamic religions. Now, theism is generally the overall belief that there are gods, but the most important thing about theism as a concept is the active part of it. So the active intervention of God in the universe. So as we think about the move from polytheism to monotheism, that begins with Abraham, about 2000 BCE, excuse me. So we're moving forward if you think about it in time. So theism is basically the belief in the Middle Ages, for example. When you get into the 18th century, 1700s, there began to be this belief as the Enlightenment came along that we could use our reason and our mind to get to human morality and reason, and that God existed, but really didn't play a large part in it. Now, that idea of God existing but not actively engaging in things is interesting, because it's going to lead us to some other beliefs further down the line. Now, agnosticism, I think many of you may find yourself in this category, because this is the idea that you just don't know. It's impossible to know whether God exists or not. So you'll hold out that possibility, but you're probably, you're kind of in this in-between stage. And if you look at the picture over there on the left, it's a church with a question mark on it. It's hard to have a practice or a faith based on a question. Right? We can ask questions, but questions don't really lead us anywhere until we start practicing something. So agnostics tend not to practice religion. They replace it with other things, right? They don't need to. They don't need to be engaged in religion, or else they don't feel that it's necessary. They haven't been raised in it. Now, atheism is the active belief that God does not exist. That is also a belief. You can't prove that God does not exist. You can't prove a negative. But the important thing about atheists is atheists, like hardcore evangelicals, tend to want to convince everyone else that their belief is right. So what's fascinating about this is the most, in my experience, the most intensely engaged people in their own belief are both atheists, hardcore atheists, and hardcore theists, both who want to convince you that their belief is correct, because that justifies their own form of belief. Now, existentialism, the last one there, comes out of European history in the post-World War II period as a result of the move towards deism, right? If God is not actively engaged in the world, then you have things like the Holocaust, and then the atomic bomb. Well, what does that mean? And basically what the existentialists get to is that life doesn't have any meaning. It's kind of an absurd joke. And to give you one example, Camus, who was a French existentialist, argued the world is just a strange, inhuman place. Often existentialists describe landscapes that are sort of barren and devoid of meaning. We build our hopes on a better tomorrow, and then all tomorrow does is bring us closer to death. So existentialists are obsessed with this idea of being trapped in the human condition, but you really can't get out of it either. You can't commit suicide, for example, because that in itself is a sort of a surrender. So this gives a lot of importance to human choice. But generally, if you go down to the bottom, this idea that our lives are defined by disorientation and confusion and emptiness and purposeless and despair. And it's really a pretty bleak way of looking at things. Very French, if you think about it. Now, you can look at these quotations, but my favorite is the one on the bottom by Woody Allen, who says, "I took a test on existentialism. I left all the answers blank and got 100, right? It doesn't matter how you answer the question. It's just you just take action." So if you look at almost all these quotes, they speak to this sort of disgust with life in general. Finally, a few examples of existentialist thinking. The myth of Sisyphus in the lower right, the man who pushes the rock up the hill and then every day pushes it up and every night it falls back down and he has to push it up again, is sort of a metaphor for our daily lives. We push the rock up, we come in the next day and it's right back at the bottom. We would do it again. You might feel that way about school, or you might just feel that way about life in general. You'll notice in both of the Beckett play and the Ionesco play, a lot of these plays are staged in empty or barren places where people are asking questions about meaning and not finding it. Waiting for Godot is waiting for God, and you will probably not be surprised to find out that the entire play they're waiting for Godot when he never shows up. And it gets more and more ridiculous and absurd. And the point is, life is absurd and ridiculous, and God's not going to come and intervene. I'll tell you more about the chairs sometime. All I will tell you is never, ever take your significant other or romantic interest to a existentialist play. I did it once and just can tell you from experience, not a good idea. So finally, No Exit by Sartre is three people who basically torture each other in a small room. They all try to commit suicide to get out of it. They can't. And Sartre ultimately says, hell is other people. So if you think about all these things, you might want to think about where you fit into this range of belief. Where are your beliefs there? Of all of the beliefs that we've studied, they're the ones that particularly appeal to you, and why do they appeal to you? And if you think about the range of belief and what an atheist like Freud would say to Black Elk, or what Black Elk would say to Freud, it's interesting to think about how people on opposite ends of the spectrum would talk to each other about their own beliefs. So those are all things for you to think about, and we will hopefully have time to discuss some of this in class.